Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Dom Manna. Happy Solo Shot Saturday. It's December. Christmas season is upon us. And I hope all of you have started your Christmas shopping. I hope all of you get some of the things on your list this year. As for me and Red Sox Nation, I'm not getting my hopes up. I understand it is still early. I understand there's a lot of time for things. But the Red Sox came out this offseason before the GM meetings, and President of Baseball Operations, Craig Breslow, 2013 World Series champ. He was a big league pitcher for many years, went to Yale University, a much smarter, more accomplished man than I will ever be, and said publicly that we feel really good 3 through 10, and we have our ace, we have our pig and crochet. We need someone to slot between those two. And I talked about a little last week how Sonny Gray could perform like a number 2 starter. He's a very good bencher who, under the hood, should have had a better year compared to what his actual ERA and batting average against say, due to FIP and some other ballpark factors and different things. And then the Red Sox go out and they trade the password, Joe Smixton Garcia, to the Pittsburgh Pirates for Johan Oviedo. I understand there were some smaller moves under the hood in the trade. What really got me was the fact that, not that I think Oviedo is a bad pitching talent, I actually kind of like Johan Oviedo. If he was a free agent and they took a 1-year flyer on him as he's now back from Tommy John surgery, I wouldn't hate it. But what I don't like is when you look at the grand scheme of this trade, the Red Sox got a guy who, if they can unlock something with him post Tommy John, he did not look great last year outside of the fastball and the extension, which I know our numbers under the hood people really like. We have a great pitching lab here in Boston. You could unlock something with Johan Oviedo. He's in that 3 to 10 range. You cannot convince me that Johan Oviedo is likely to become that number 2 starter behind Garrett Crochet. You get Tyler Santiago, who is a 27-year-old left-hander who, granted, can touch 100. We just traded away our left-handed controllable pitching depth in the bullpen in Chris Murphy and Brennan Bernardino to open some 40-man roster spots for some guys we'd like to keep. So you're backfilling there, and you're backfilling with Adonis Guzman, who was a 5th-round pick out of Arizona. This past draft, he played in 1 single-A game. He homered, but he's known to be a defensive first catcher. During those 40-man roster trades, they got Luke Heyman from the Mariners, and they got one other catcher. And I understand they're trying to backfill that position because you do need multiple catchers at each level to catch your pitching staff as you build it up, your pitching pipeline. But they trade the password, and they trade Jesus Travieso, who's an 18-year-old who throws 100 miles per hour. So the Pirates are getting a top 100 prospect outfielder, someone who was tearing the cover off the ball in AAA. I understand the swing decisions and strikeouts aren't where you want them to be. And an 18-year-old who throws 100 miles per hour for a 27-year-old who throws 100 miles per hour, a defensive catcher, and a guy who, at his absolute ceiling, is a number 3 starter in the big leagues. Most likely he's a 4 or 5 starter. That is one option left. 2 more years of control. They have through 2028, but only one option. So if he sucks to begin the year, you don't really have a lot of flexibility because you only get 1 move. You can only send him down once. So I don't love the trade concept because what it's signaling to a lot of people is that they feel really good 3 through 10. And that means that the Red Sox, to upgrade their rotation, to get that number 2, are going to have to get uncomfortable. They're going to have to trade a Brian Bello. who's under control for the next couple of years. They have to trade Connolly early or Peyton Tolley, who have many years of control under him. They're left-handed with high velocity. To upgrade one of them to a Freddie Peralta or to that other number 2 starter, whether that be in a Tarek Skubal trade or anything else. Everyone's trying to say, like, read between the lines. That means they're going to do this. And I'm not saying it doesn't mean they can't do that. But to me, when I hear we feel good 3 through 10, we need a number 2, it's that Bayo's the 3, and you feel good with Early, Sandoval, Crawford, all those guys. They bring in Sonny Gray, who, dollars-wise, we'll get into this in a second when we get to with the budgeting that I'm getting sick of. Sonny Gray is essentially Lucas Giolito in this team. He's replacing Lucas Giolito almost 1-for-1 in terms of dollars, in terms of role as a veteran starting pitcher who can perform as a 2 for stretches, but is really more of a 3 or a 4. Johan Oviedo, this trade to me didn't signal that. This trade signaled to me that in order to get Sonny Gray, you had to trade Richard Fitz, a guy who made your starting rotation out of camp last year, a guy who has a lot of decent upside and I think could be a very solid back-end starter for the Cardinals this year. I think this move was simply to replenish that depth. I think that just as Sonny Gray was the replacement for Lucas Giolito, Johan Oviedo is the replacement for Richard Fitz. And in terms of that, I think Tyler Samaniego was a replacement for Chris Murphy or Brendan Bernardino. They're just backfilling these moves in the margins and not actually necessarily improving the team. Do I think Sonny Gray is likely to have as good a production or better than Lucas Giolito in 2026? Yes. Do I think that Johan Oviedo could have a better season than Richard Fitz in 2026? It's possible. Do I think that they're slam dunk upgrades? No. And we're still missing that big number 2, which now, instead of feeling really good 3 through 10, having controllable guys like Bayo and Early and Tolley there with options, with flexibility, more than one option like Oviedo, we're going to have to move one of those guys to get that number 2 instead of adding a true number 2 to the rotation you already have built, the depth that you already had built, the flexibility that you already had built. And the reason why they're moving so hard in the margins, both of these 40-man trades and now to do these 2 starting pitcher trades, is because they are operating under a tight budget. And everyone has had their turn talking about the article where if the Red Sox exceed the $244 million collective bargaining tax, that they would be operating at a loss. I don't know their absolute books. I don't know what they're paying Sam Kennedy and all these guys in the front office. I don't know what they're paying their employees at the ballpark. I know there was a strike for a lot of the vendors during the season, so they probably spent a little bit less than they were budgeting for during that time period. But the Red Sox finished 12th in Major League Baseball last year in adjusted payroll. $203.6 million. So in order to get to that $44 million, $244 million, if their payroll was exactly the same, they'd have to spend about $40 million on players, give or take, right? But right now, Alex Bregman, Steven Matz, Justin Wilson, Rob Refsnyder, and Liam Hendricks are not under contract. That's a combined $40 million. You notice I didn't mention Lucas Giolito because Lucas Giolito made $19 million last year. Sonny Gray will be making $21 million this year. So it doesn't change the math very much. The Red Sox have $80 million in payroll to play with. $80 million. They're saying we can't get Bregman and Alonso. They're saying we can't sign a front of the line starter like a Michael King or a Framber Valdez. We couldn't afford Dylan Cease at $30 million. This is just to get to the collective bargaining tax threshold. And for those of you that don't understand the numbers, I brought this up from MLB.com. Each year, clubs that exceed predetermined payroll thresholds are subject to a collective balancing tax, which is commonly referred to as the luxury tax. Those who carry payrolls above that threshold are taxed on each dollar above the threshold, with the tax rate increasing based on the number of consecutive years a club has exceeded said threshold. A team's CBT tax figure is determined using average annual value of each player's contract on the 40-man roster, plus any additional player benefits. Every team's final CBT figure is calculated at the end of each season. Note, if a player signs an extension that doesn't kick in until a later season, the AV for the purposes of CBT doesn't change until the new deal begins. So there are some situations where that happens. These are the thresholds from the past couple of years. 2022, it was $230 million. 2023, it was $233 million. 2024, it was $237 million. Now, during that stretch of baseball, I am not going to slander the Red Sox for not getting there because those teams didn't end up being competitive. It wasn't a great window of Red Sox baseball. Partially because they weren't willing to invest in the product, but partially because of the team that was built, the lack of depth in the farm system that got built up over that time with Chaim Bloom. I understand. Last year it was $241 million. Even if you add Rafael Devers' $25 million against the collective bargaining tax to the team last year, which they didn't pay the full amount, they would have been under that number. And this year, they're saying if they go over $244 million, which is the new number, that they won't be able to get that. They're currently $80 million or so, give or take dollars, depending on Oviedo's prices. They're about $80 million off from that number. And they're saying they don't think that they can get two major bats. They're saying they don't think they can fill that number 2 starter role, or they want to do it on a budget, taking Bayo's major league dollars and transferring it to Freddie Peralta's major league dollars. I am just so fed up because if you look at Forbes, they said the Red Sox made $574 million last year in revenue, based on the 2024 performance. The 2025 Red Sox were a little bit better than the 2024 Red Sox, so I have a feeling that they made a tiny bit over that. If not, they made around that number, right? That ranks 6th in the big leagues. So you spend the 12th on payroll, you made the 6th amount of revenue. But this is very important. They were the most profitable team in Major League Baseball with $120 million in operating income, showing strong financial management. I understand that the Red Sox, to John Henry and the Fenway Sports Group, are now just an asset. They aren't their pride and joy. They have interests in different fields, and I understand that they can't even be involved in the day-to-day of these things. But the fact that these numbers, that teams that are winning or playing for the World Series are blowing by the last couple of years, the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Dodgers have all been above these CBT numbers. And as I said, you only get taxed for every dollar above it. So you're not getting taxed if you spend $264 million, you go $20 million over, right? you aren't getting taxed on $264 million. You're getting a 12% tax on that additional $20 million you go above the threshold. So the Red Sox, who are the most profitable team in Major League Baseball, who are not even trying to spend in the top 10. They're borderline top 10 payroll, even if they spend a decent amount of that $80 million of wiggle room they have right now. And the reason I brought up that 2022 through 2024 range of not being teams worth investing in, the Red Sox were one of the hottest teams in baseball for a good chunk of the season last year. The Red Sox have Garrett Crochet in the prime of his powers. They have Roman Anthony and Christian Campbell and this young core of guys locked up and loaded, ready to give you production well below their value. Ceddanne Rafaela, Wilyer Abreu, Jarren Duran, all these guys are under control. And instead of saying, now this is the time to spend, they're saying we can't spend. We'll operate at a loss. We can't afford these two nice toys when we have almost $80 million in room. This drives me freaking nuts because I hate to bring up the Rafael Devers trade for the 80th time. I don't think I'll ever be over it. I don't think any justification outside of the Red Sox spending that money and winning a championship in the next couple years will make me think that was the right move at the right time. It was clearly a salary dump. The Red Sox have strong financial management, which means they look around Major League Baseball and they say, wow, there are so many teams in the big leagues that haven't even given $200 million to a single player, and they've been able to be competitive. They've been able to win world championships without having a single player with a $200 million contract. And we're paying Rafi another $100 million on top. They said point blank when they dumped the entire contract that they just wanted to get it done. They didn't shop him around. And I think the biggest thing was because they wanted that contract off the books. They wanted to be comfortably under this collective bargaining tax. This is an owner in John Henry who has been one of the leading people pushing for a salary cap in this sport. He wants to spend less, but not have his competitors spend more. He said, I don't want to meet the Dodgers and Blue Jays and Yankees up here. I want them to come down to me. And it's just laughable because the Red Sox that I watched when I was a kid, when I've been growing up through college, they went out and they got the stars. They went out and they made the trades. They looked to improve their baseball team. And they did it in times, sometimes when they weren't lined up to win. They still made the moves to try to win. But when your team is lined up to win, when it's prime, Roman Anthony's a stud. Garrett Crochet is a monster. And you have plenty of good guys behind both of them in the lineup and the rotation. You have clear holes. Number 2 starter. Power hitting bats, Devers. And a left-handed relieving now. Behind Chapman, you got nobody. Those are the 3 things you need to spend on. You have about $80 million to stay under the tax. If you spend another 100, 120, you could win the dang World Series. I'm not saying spend just to spend, but there are difference-making guys that fit all of those categories that are available right now. And instead of doing that, they're backfilling guys that just help them make the World Series. And then on top of that, they are it's just really disheartening knowing that your team has the money to spend, has the resources, and is just calculatedly budgeting every single thing to line their pockets as much as they can. When the goal always was and should be to win a championship, to compete for championships. Uh, and I understand that's why Chaim Bloom lost his job, was for not getting under the luxury tax threshold in 2022. And now you see the Red Sox saying, "Oh, if we go over it, well, we are gonna operate at a loss," which is just absurd that you shove that to your local sports writers and let them get that out to the masses, because all it takes is a couple Googles to see what you spent on payroll, what you made, what your team's valued at, what your assets are valued at. It's not very hard for the regular everyday consumer like myself to look into those things. So I'm Ovie-done with all these marginal moves, and call me and wake me up when they finally make the moves that they so obviously and know they need to be making. Speaking of a team with a lot of money that's not afraid to spend it, the New York Mets have been in the news, not just because of the Brandon Nimmo Marcus Semien swap, but they have already spent some money signing former Yankee Devin Williams to a 3-year, $50 million contract. Some of that money is deferred, so they're only paying Devin Williams about $12 or $13 million against the luxury tax. Devin Williams was one of the best closers in baseball. He went to New York. He got the Yankees to end their long-standing facial hair policy and proceeded to have a pretty rough year, as relievers tend to do. There's very few relievers that have a career full of great seasons. When you pitch a smaller sample size like they do, relief pitchers appear in somewhere between 30 and 70 games a year, somewhere usually. For them to have a couple blow-up games, it really messes up their ERA and their batting average against and all those things, because it's a much smaller sample size than the starting pitcher. Had a pretty rough year, but towards the end of the season, ended up looking pretty good. David Stearns, who runs the Mets, was in Milwaukee when Williams was there, and this is essentially Edwin Diaz insurance. They're not signing Devin Williams as an affordable way to replace Edwin Diaz. They are replacing him to, one, be insurance, but two, hopefully be one of the best 7th or 8th inning arms in baseball, leading the road to Edwin Diaz, who they still want to re-sign. And the New York Mets and their strategy is essentially, how can we upgrade this team? How can we spend money? What players are willing to defer contracts? What are our clear needs? We need defense up the middle. Give me Marcus Semien. We need back-end bullpen help. Let's not just re-sign Edwin Diaz. Let's bring in Devin Williams. Teams that are wired that way are going to be rewarded. If the Mets during this David Stearns and Steve Cohen era don't end up winning a championship with a core surrounded around Lindor and Soto, I will be very much shocked. They missed the playoffs last year. I understand the collapse is very fresh. Do not let that blind you from the way that they're running the organization, from the talent that they're willing to bring in the building. They're always willing to add. They're always willing to look to make their team better. And that's something every single sports fan, even if you're not a baseball guy, in any of the major sports, you want your ownership thinking like that. So hats off to the Mets. I like the Devin Williams signing. I think it's funny how many former Yankees that they're bringing on, Clay Holmes and Juan Soto, now Devin Williams. They are becoming the place that some people would prefer to play in New York, which is something I never thought I'd get to say in my lifetime. Now, the rumor mill is brewing, and I won't go too deep into it because my rant for the Red Sox was a little bit longer than I thought it would be. But there are a lot of rumors. The first one being that the Minnesota Twins are not looking to shop or not planning to shop Byron Buxton, Joe Ryan, or Pablo Lopez. Justin Havens from Baseball is Dead, I think, said it best on Twitter. Well, that's a bad plan. You just sold your entire team, including some guys that had control for multiple years, like Louis Varland, who could have been your closer of the future if you wanted to trade Griffin Jax, and Johan Duran, which they did. And then they also kicked Louis Varland to the curb instead of giving him a chance to close. I don't know what the Twins are thinking. I think that Byron Buxton is a guy who said he wanted to spend his whole career in Minnesota. The fans love him. Former first-round pick. He's had some really great moments. I think the fact that he said, I'd waive my no-trade clause and want out of here if they continue to sell. What does keeping Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez do? It keeps them above the tanking line. Because those are two front-line starting pitchers. Those are two very, very good guys to have in the top of the rotation. Their lineup is very young around Buxton. Their bullpen has been dismantled. I don't see the Twins as a playoff team in the next couple of years. So to me, you have 2 more years of control. For Joe Ryan, you have 3 more years of Pablo Lopez. You have, I believe, 3 or 4 more years of Byron Buxton. Those guys got to go. Your plan is not to compete in that window. So unless you're going to extend Joe Ryan for another 5 or do something that's a win now move to win during Buxton's end of prime, I don't know what the Twins are thinking. Kind of back to what I was talking about with the Red Sox using their pitching to get pitching. Both the Diamondbacks with Ketel Marte and the Brewers with Freddie Peralta have kind of hinted at those guys are more on the market than they were originally thinking, but they want pitching back. If the Red Sox get a Ketel Marte, I'd have to eat my words from earlier in this program. But I just don't think that's going to happen. I think the price is going to be really steep. And I think that Ketel Marte, while he is an elite player, is still not the single answer. Because I think if the Red Sox trade for Ketel Marte, they wouldn't sign Pete Alonso or Alex Bregman or Kyle Schwarber. They wouldn't sign a second bat to fill out the middle of their lineup. So that's a rumor mill that's been heating up pretty much. Outside of that, there's been a lot of buzz about Tatsuya Amai, the Japanese pitcher. He made some comments on Daisuke Matsuzaka's radio program talking about how, while he respects Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, he would feel no greater pride and honor than taking those guys down himself, which essentially says teams that want to beat the Dodgers, come pay me. And now you're seeing a lot more teams interested in Amai or tied to Amai than you were originally seeing. He's a guy who has plus stuff, 27 years old. I think he's going to get a substantial contract. A lot of people saw after the Dylan Cease contract, well, that will be the most dollars handed out to a starting pitcher this offseason. I still think Amai has a chance to beat the 210 that Dylan Cease was able to get from Toronto because of the age on his side. Dylan Cease was 30 getting that contract. Amai is going to be 28. So he's got a couple years on him. The stuff is plus. And I'm very, very excited to see where he goes because that's kind of the energy I've been waiting for from one of these Japanese players. I understand that they play with a lot of honor over there and a lot of respect, but they can't just all want to team up and beat all the Americans. They can do that in the World Baseball Classic this spring if they want to, but it is just really, really refreshing to see a big star from Japan say something like that on record. I'm interested to see where him and Murakami and Akamoto and all these bigger name Japanese screens that were posted end up landing, hopefully outside of LA, to add a little parody and interest to those storylines because there's so much great talent over there, and I don't want it to just be honored in Los Angeles. Here at the Solo Shot Sports Podcast, we throw back down the third baseline to this day in baseball history. December is kind of a weird time for the baseball calendar. There's some birthdays. Hall of Famer Tony Lazzeri, whose autograph is at the bottom of the scorecard, was born on this day from the Murderers Row Yankees. His autographs are actually very tough to get. He wasn't a big signer. But he's not who I'm going to talk about today. There was a move made by my Boston Red Sox on this date in 2010, and this is what I'm talking about. Is the Boston Red Sox ended up finalizing a trade on this day in 2010 for slugging first baseman Adrian Gonzalez of the San Diego Padres. The headliner prospect in that trade was a pitcher. It was Casey Kelly, who The Red Sox, if you remember that, he was really highly touted. Anthony Rizzo ended up being the best player sent to San Diego out of that deal, as well as outfielder Raymond Fuentes and a player to be named later for left-handed slugger Adrian Gonzalez. And Adrian Gonzalez, in 2011, was an MVP finalist for the Red Sox. His swing worked perfectly at Fenway. He's a very forgotten player because of the era of first base he played in, especially in the National League. There were so many good ones: Pujols, Prince Fielder, Derek Lee. The list goes on and on. Adrian Gonzalez was great. And that was the kind of guy that they traded for, they extended, and he looked to be a piece to try to push them towards a World Series championship. The Red Sox could use a slugging first baseman right now. All it takes is dollars to get Pete Alonso. All it takes is dollars to get Kyle Schwarber. The Red Sox need to make a move like this because the team that they have on paper has a window, it's ready to win, and they need to realize it. They can't just say we have such a plethora of young talent. Our window will last forever. Look at the Baltimore Orioles. Look at how quick that fell apart because they had an obvious need and they didn't address it because they didn't want to give up too many prospects. They didn't want to potentially lose some trades in the long haul. They thought about a dynasty instead of realizing a World Series window. I don't want the Red Sox to be like that. On this day, they weren't. They traded for Adrian Gonzalez. 2010. Rounding things out here, I want to talk about the Contemporary Era Committee because this ballot was dropped a while ago, and I talked about it. 8 names that did their contributions mainly from 1980 to present will be voted on. A 16-man committee. You need to get 12 votes to get elected. Don Mattingly, Dale Murphy, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Carlos Delgado, Jeff Kent, Fernando Valenzuela, and Gary Sheffield are the 8 names. Outside of Valenzuela, I think that's 7 very worthy Hall of Fame candidates. But what is kind of moot about that conversation when the ballot first drops is there's only 16 people that get a say. And those people that are in that room are more important than anything else. We've seen that with past Hall of Fame elections like Harold Baines. The people in the room are a big part of the reason why he was elected. Usually they don't drop or announce the names of the people on that committee until 48 hours or so before the vote. The vote is tomorrow, by the way, December 7th. We will be finding out the results tomorrow. And we ended up finding out that these 16 names over a week in advance. That never happens. Never. I've been following the Hall of Fame my entire life. They never announced that early. And I think the names are extremely telling because Hall of Famer players that were named to the committee: Fergie Jenkins, Jim Cott, Juan Marichal, Tony Perez, Ozzie Smith, Alan Trammell, and Robin Yount. Robin Yount is the only one that has not actively spoke out against steroids. All right? The rest of those guys are older baseball for the most part. Many of them have vocalized their disdain for steroids on the history of the game. MLB executives: Mark Anastasio, Doug Melvin, Marty Moreno, Kim Ng, Tony Reagans, and Terry Ryan. None of those guys were owners or executives for the players that are in here, but a lot of them have ties to Minnesota, to Los Angeles Angels, and to the Milwaukee Brewers. So it's a very central looking thing in terms of the players as well as the executives. But the really interesting thing was that there was 3 media/historians: Steve Hurt, Tyler Kepner, and Jason Stark. Jason Stark is probably the name you are most well versed with. He was very publicly for Bonds and Clemens for the Hall of Fame from the jump. He was very much on that train. He was voting for them. Kepner also voted for Pettit last year, who was a known steroid guy. So those two are going to try their best to convince a group of former executives and a group of Hall of Fame players why Bonds and Clemens are the two best players on this ballot. Because there is no argument, in my opinion, that they aren't. The new rules that have been put in place as a reminder for you guys that don't remember in this last segment. From starting at this year's Era Committee, the Hall of Fame has instituted a rule where if you are unable to get 5 or more votes of the 16, so over 25% of the vote, over a quarter of the votes, you will not be eligible next cycle to be on this ballot. Okay, so if Fernando Valenzuela falls short of 5 votes, which he should, objectively, no disrespect to Fernando. Fernando Mania was amazing, but he's the least deserving guy on this list. He falls below 5 votes when the contemporary era ballot gets voted on in 2028, going for the class of 2029. Fernando Valenzuela will not be considered as one of those 8 names. If Fernando Valenzuela then appears on the ballot 6 or more years later for the class of 2032 or later, he falls short of 5 votes again, they don't have to consider him going forward. So there's a lot at stake here for the living candidates. Notice Fernando Valenzuela is the one deceased candidate on this ballot. Because these living candidates, if they don't get enough support, they basically have to wait 6 years to get considered again. And at their ages, 6 years is a lot of time. God willing, they all live long, happy, healthy lives. But this is the stuff that's at stake, and I hope is stressed to the people in this room that use all 3 of your votes, because you only get 3 votes max. Use all 3 of your votes and vote for people not just to get in this time, but to save them from not being considered in the future. It's the first year of it. I know some people in the room will not take it seriously enough. It's a huge deal for us who care about the Hall of Fame. But very, very interested to see how the voting results go tomorrow, based on Kim NG being in the Marlins organization when Don Mattingly was the manager, based on Jim Cott being a former Yankee and Yankee broadcaster. I think Don Mattingly, who received 8 votes when this committee last met in 2022, has the best chance of getting in. If I had to give you a prediction, I would say Don Mattingly gets in, and that's it, based on the people in this committee. Is Don Mattingly the most deserving guy on this list? No. Is he Hall of Fame worthy, and will I celebrate him? Absolutely. I think that's part of the reason why he stepped away from the Blue Jays, why he hasn't taken another job in baseball yet. I think he's expecting to get into Cooperstown this summer. I think he's expecting to want to enjoy that with his family and relax a little bit. Well deserved for Don Mattingly if that is the case, but I will cover those results next week with all of you and what the results mean for the guys that don't end up getting in this time around. I appreciate each and every one of you for spending part of your Solo Shot Saturday with me. If you enjoyed the program, please leave a like and subscribe on YouTube. If you haven't already, leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All those things help the show, but nothing more than sharing the show with someone who loves the game of baseball as much as we do. I'm Don Manta.